Hi, I just wanted to make this video as a response to Amanda Pearl's Wheel of the Year confusion. This is Carl Bonner. I'm not actually a practicing pagan at this point. I've been interested in the tradition for many years, but I'm thinking about becoming more actively involved in some branch of it in some way. But like you, I don't identify with the conventional story of the god and the goddess and how it relates to the Wheel of the Year very much. It seems to be full of gaps and holes. But anyway, talking about the real Wheel of the Year, which I think is the most important element in all of it. In fact, I like to joke around that I call myself a season-worshipping pagan more than anything else. Well, first of all, we have to realize that the Wheel of the Year, as it exists, being you divide the year into 8 essentially equal portions. I like to, as a science math type, I like to be real precise and divide the year into 8, exactly even portions, at least in terms of right ascension or ecliptic distance that the sun travels across the sky. But we'll talk about some of those difficulties later on, not in this video. But anyway, you have to realize that the themes of the Wheel of the Year came out of Europe, in particular northern and central Europe, in a climate that's dominated by a pronounced cold winter dormancy season and something is going off with my phone. Anyway, there, that'll fix it. Anyway, so you have a pattern where December, January, February, everything's cold and dormant. Maybe not snowing it's not necessarily covered with snow all winter long, but it's a pronounced winter. Then you have the middle part, sometime in April or May is when the spring really buds out. And then you have a definite summer season, and things start to fade out late September, October, going into November for the fall. Now that traditional 4-season model that has been co-opted by our mass culture here in the United States, and unfortunately our seasonal retail is built around this very narrow concept of the cycle that's based on that type of a climate. It's a model that works great if you live in most of Europe, except for the extremely hot or cold parts. It doesn't work so well if you live down in Cyprus or up in Lapland or Iceland, but pretty much anywhere in the middle of Europe it works great. It also works reasonably well in the heart of China, most of Japan, and then in North America, I'd say anywhere on the west coast from like southern British Columbia down to northern California, all throughout the kind of the upper middle section of the U.S., not the Sun Belt and not the far north of Canada, but like southern Canada down through maybe the middle area, like we said northern California. We could argue about this for ad infinitum, but you get the basic idea. What they call the cool, temperate 4-season climate, and then again the southern hemisphere, southern Australia, New Zealand, parts of Chile. If you're in that climate zone, the story of the Wheel of the Year seems to make pretty good sense. You can tweak a few things here and there depending on some peculiarities for your climate, but it basically makes sense. Now, if you live in a polar climate or in a semi-tropical climate, it doesn't make the same sense as it would there. For example, if you were going to live in, say Israel or Palestine, you probably wouldn't have the same themes for the seasons that you would in a cool northern climate. There would be more like you have a rainy winter, brief rainy winter, and then an active season of spring after that, and then a long, basically a second dormancy season for the summer. It would be kind of the same thing in Southern California or the desert Southwest, in certain climates like that, or in a tropical monsoon climate. What do you do there as far as your Wheel of the Year? So I think that climate and region of the world you live in plays into how you set up your own Wheel of the Year. To go even further beyond this topic, and as I said, I'm kind of a science math geek, so I like to take the concept of the Wheel of the Year and expand upon it and think in terms of the total amount of sun angle and solar energy depending on your latitude, what dates, and the Chinese calendar, which divides the year into 24 instead of 8, you could think of it as a more finely attuned wheel of the year. And there's some important dates on there. And I'll probably make another video about this eventually, but another interesting and fascinating concept is that really the wheel of the year and the seasonal cycle applies not just to the Earth but to other planets as well. I mean, Mars has a seasonal cycle. It has its own wheel of the year. Now, being that the atmosphere on Mars is very, very, very thin, and they have no oceans, you don't get the same lag in temperature off the solstices. So on Mars, the summer solstice really is the midpoint of summer, and the winter solstice is the midpoint of winter. But for example, I think it's the northern fall equinox when the sun's going into the southern hemisphere on Mars. Somewhere between there and Samhain is when their dust storm season kicks in. And it goes, I believe, until the following spring equinox. So it's basically during the southern spring and summer and early fall. That's when they have their big dust storm season, which covers the entire planet. And you could say, of course, on Mars, the wheel of the year is twice as long as ours, roughly. On Saturn, it's about 30 times as long. And I believe the next, one of the things is when Saturn is at an equinox, the rings from the Earth appear perfectly edge-on, and that happened back in 2009, I think. Yeah, 2009 was the spring equinox based on the northern hemisphere of Saturn. Well, we're just about to get to Beltane on Saturn. That'll be coming up, I think, early next year. And what I like to think of Beltane or Samhain on Saturn as being the point when the rings really start to open up. It's a really good time if you're into astronomy to take your telescope and look at the rings because they're really open. You can see the divisions within the rings. So, yeah, Beltane on Saturn is what I think of as the beginning of ring season, shall we say. Great time to pull out the scope and get a good look at it. So really the concept of the wheel of the year and the seasonal cycle is even more fundamental than the Earth itself. It's based on because planets orbit around stars and because planets' axis usually isn't perfectly perpendicular to the plane of the orbit. It's at some angle. That angle creates a cycle in which one hemisphere gets more or less light across the course of the year, and that creates the seasons. And then if you have a planet with a lot of atmosphere or oceans, it tends to delay the temperature cycle a little bit behind the sun cycle, which is why here on the Earth the hottest time of the year isn't in late June, but it's more late July, early August. And yeah, so that's basically the concept of the wheel of the year. I plan to make probably a couple more of these videos dealing with the more technical, mathematical aspects of it, and I could really go off onto a tangent there, but not for today. But basically, the wheel of the year is all about the seasons. That's it. And how you interpret it and exactly how you divide the year, I mean, you don't necessarily have to divide it into 8. You could do like the Chinese, divide it into 24. Our own calendar divides the year into 12 months. I mean, that's a wheel of the year of sorts. Or you could just divide it into 4. You know, just do the solstices and equinoxes and forget about the cross quarters, and you'd still have a model that gives you some idea as to how the seasonal cycle works. So I like the 8-spoked wheel of the year because the cross quarters divide the year up into seasons based on maximum and minimum sun angles. So you have between Beltane and Lughnasadh, you have the period of the strongest sunlight. Between Samhain and Imbolc is the period of the weakest sunlight. As a matter of fact, you can even go on to some of the meteorology, like weather.com. The last several years has brought out a point. Every year in early November, they talk about the start of solar winter, which is from November 6th, astronomical Samhain to astronomical Imbolc. And the Chinese calendar does the same thing. Their winter runs from early November through early February. They don't take into account that seasonal lag that I was talking about earlier, caused by our atmosphere and our oceans delaying the heat and holding them in. Again, if you lived on a planet that didn't have that, like Mars, it would be a totally different story. But that's basically how I see the Wheel of the Year. It's a very simple idea in that the seasonal cycle, we like to divide it into winter, spring, summer, and fall, but it's really more of a continuous process with the seasons overlapping to some extent, and each season having, shall we say, sub-seasons within it. So we have the harvest season now in August. We're going into the harvest season, which it still feels like summer outside, but you're starting to notice certain elements of fall coming on with the longer nights. We'll start to notice the temperatures cooling off a little bit at night, probably in the next couple weeks here, at least in the Columbia Gorge of the Pacific Northwest, where I live. And so the Wheel of the Year is a concept that I will probably be a central part of my spiritual philosophy until my days in this plane of existence are over. That's basically what I have to say. So thank you. I really liked your video, and I hope you get a chance to see this one.